Editor's comment. For those readers who think that replacing the cover of a book is just too simple, or that they couldn't do it anyway because they're not book publishers, the editors would point out that if you had had that simple idea before the publisher did, he probably would have been glad to sell you those failed books at pennies on the dollar. Then you could have been the one to change the cover, and suddenly you would have been the publisher of a bestseller. However, the idea of replacing the covers wouldn't have meant a thing if you didn't also have ideas about how to market and promote that flashy new cover. And that is Hill's point. Coca-Cola was a recipe, a creative idea, but it would have stayed just a recipe if Asa Candler hadn't also had other creative ideas to market it and the faith in himself to carry through on those ideas. Spence Silver was a chemist working for 3M when, by accident, he created a glue that wasn't very sticky. Needless to say, 3M was not much interested in glue that didn't stick, and Silver's invention was shelved as a failure. But Silver liked his glue, so for 5 years he kept demonstrating it to anyone who would listen. Nobody did, until Arthur Fry, who worked in the tape division at 3M, found that when he was at choir practice, he kept losing his place in the hymnal, because the pieces of paper he used to mark his place slipped down or fell out of the book. A little of Silver's not very sticky glue on the slips of paper, and they stayed where he wanted them, then peeled off easily when he was done. That was the eureka moment. They had just invented the world's best bookmark, Post-its. But that's not the end of the story, or the end of the imaginative ideas that were needed to make Post-its happen. Fry would also need perseverance. First, he had to convince the engineers to solve production problems, and to do it, he knocked a hole in his basement wall so he could install a prototype of the production equipment. He stuck with it, and finally, 2 years later, 3M gave the project to their marketing department. The marketing experts put together ads and brochures selling this sticky notepad idea and rolled it out in a 4-city test. The results were a disaster. Nobody got it, so nobody bought it. Who would pay money for scratch paper? The Post-it project was about to be scrapped when Jeffrey Nicholson and Joseph Ramey added their imaginations. Like Silver and Fry, Nicholson and Ramey had faith in the idea because they saw how people in their office fell in love with these little sticky pieces of paper once they started working with them. So Nicholson and Ramey went to Richmond, Virginia, one of the 4 test cities that had failed, and they went up and down the business district, going into offices and giving pads of Post-its to receptionists, secretaries, and anyone else who would listen. Whereas 3M's conventional marketing machinery had failed, giving Post-its to the people who would actually use them did the trick. Once those Richmond office workers started to use Post-its, it didn't seem like a bad idea at all to pay for scratch paper. They got it, and they bought it. The Richmond test turned from failure to success, and soon Post-its were sticking to everything around the world. Here's another simple idea that imagination turned into success. The story began with a man whose problem was just the opposite of Spence Silver's. This man had something that stuck too well. George de Mestral was a Swiss mountaineer who went hunting one day with his dog. But when they got home, they were both covered with burrs. The burrs were so difficult to remove that de Mestral put them under a magnifying glass to learn why. He saw that they were covered with tiny hooks which attached themselves to fur and fabric. That was when the flash hit. If burrs stuck where you didn't want them, why couldn't you put tiny hooks on things so they would stick where you did want them? Like everyone else mentioned in this book, de Mestral had an imaginative idea. But that was just the beginning. He also had the faith in himself to keep going when people laughed at his idea, which many did, until he eventually found a French textile plant that would help him do what he wanted. However, even when they finally worked out a way to use cotton fabric to make what they called locking tape, they couldn't afford to mass produce it. And that's when de Mestral accidentally discovered that when you sew nylon under infrared light, it naturally made little hooks. Now they could manufacture it economically. All they needed was a name. One side was fuzzy like velvet, and the other side was crochet, the French word for hook. Take half vel and half crow, combine it with imagination, The result is Velcro, and a Swiss mountaineer becomes a business tycoon. The Sony Corporation once tried to make a very small stereo tape recorder that would work with standard-sized cassettes, but they couldn't do it. They could make a small playback machine, but at the time the electronics needed to also make it a recording machine just couldn't be made small enough. They concluded that the design was a failure. Then one day, Sony's honorary chairman, Masaru Ibuka, walked into the laboratory and saw that a few of the engineers were using the prototypes of the failed tape recorder to listen to music tapes. They didn't seem to care that it couldn't record. They just liked to be able to walk around listening to their favorite music. Then came the imaginative idea that made all the difference. Ibuka remembered that another division was working on lightweight headphones. That was the flash. Ibuka's imagination made the connection that the rest of the engineers had not. In Ibuka's view, they hadn't made a failed recorder. They had created a successful private stereo listener. They added the headphones, named it the Walkman, and it revolutionized both the music business and the electronics industry. Clarence Saunders was a grocery clerk in a small southern retail store. One day he was standing with a tray in his hands, waiting his turn in a cafeteria. He had never earned more than $20 a week before then, and no one had ever noticed anything about him that indicated unusual ability. But something took place in his mind as he stood in the line of waiting people that put his imagination to work. That was when he came up with the idea that this same self-serve concept would also work at the grocery store. Clarence Saunders took the idea to his boss. Naturally, his boss told him he was crazy. So Clarence Saunders quit his job, went out and did what he needed to do to raise the money, and opened the first self-serve grocery store. He called it Piggly Wiggly, and Clarence Saunders, the $20 a week grocery clerk, rapidly became the multi-million-dollar chain store grocery man of America. Sylvan Goldman was the owner of a number of Piggly Wiggly stores in Oklahoma, and like any good businessman, he spent a lot of time watching his customers go up and down the aisles, putting their choices into their baskets or net shopping bags. One night, while trying to figure out how to get his customers to buy more at one time, he found himself staring at a basket sitting on the seat of a wooden folding chair. Eureka! He called in his mechanic, Fred Young. They put some wheels on the bottom of the legs, added another basket below the seat, and the shopping cart was born. As this edition is being readied for publication, there are about 35 million shopping carts in America, and approximately 1.25 million new carts are sold each year. Thomas Stemberg, whom we also mentioned earlier, was another supermarket executive who watched his customers as they shopped. By this time, shopping carts were well established in supermarkets, and it was because his customers were pushing shopping carts up and down the aisles that he got his flash of inspiration. He was so sure of his idea that he convinced another supermarket executive, Leo Kahn, to join him. Together, they took the supermarket concept and applied it to selling office supplies. And in 1986, they opened their first store in Brighton, Massachusetts. They called it Staples. In 1989, they took the company public. And 10 years later, there were more than 1,000 Staples stores with revenues exceeding $7 billion. We'll end this commentary with another set of connected stories, which make the point that sometimes the most imaginative part of marketing is in the timing. If you were to go shopping in the late 1800s, it usually meant bartering with a merchant who would then have to get the goods from storage shelves kept behind the counter. In the 1870s, fixed pricing was just starting to be used by storekeepers. Merchants were trying the idea by setting out a table of merchandise that was all priced the same, usually 5 cents. Frank Winfield Woolworth was a clerk in a general store, and he convinced the store owner to let him try the 5-cent table idea. Although it worked, the owner wasn't impressed. So Woolworth borrowed $350 from his boss, and in 1879 opened his first 5-cent store in Utica, New York. It was an entire store full of goods where everything cost a nickel. A year later, he had 4 stores, and the 4th one, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, was the first that he named F.W. Woolworth's 5 and 10 cent store. 20 years later, he had 238 stores. By the time of his death in 1919, there were over 1,000 F.W. Woolworth locations. He had established the first nationwide chain of general merchandise stores, and he had built the tallest building in New York City as his headquarters. The Woolworth Company stayed true to the original idea and didn't carry any merchandise that cost more than a dime until 1932, when the top price was raised to 20 cents. But as times changed, the fixed price was dropped, the merchandise became more varied, and the company kept growing until it had over 8,000 stores worldwide, selling everything from notions to appliances and furniture. Then in the 1960s and 1970s, something started to happen. The mood of America was changing, but the Woolworth stores weren't. And that was when Sam Walton opened the first Walmart in Rogers, Arkansas in 1962. Walton got into the retail business after the Second World War, when his father-in-law loaned him the money to buy a franchised Butler Brothers store in Bentonville, Arkansas. By 1962, Sam and his brother Bud owned 16 variety stores in Arkansas, Missouri, and Kansas. It was in these stores that Sam Walton first started adding the magic ingredient of imagination. In addition to his flair for promotion, Sam tried new approaches to the way household goods and general merchandise could be sold at retail. He insisted on clean, well-lighted interiors, and he introduced the concept of self-service, with aisles wide enough for shopping carts and checkout counters at the front of the store. He also started buying direct from manufacturers, and he created profit-sharing plans that kept his family of employees loyal, hardworking, and neighborly. In 1962, he incorporated those and other imaginative ideas when he opened his first store that he called Walmart. The basic magic was that he sold brand-name merchandise at discount prices. But there was also magic in the way he kept a friendly hometown feel to his store, even though it was what is now called a big box store. Sam Walton's Walmart store was a success, so he just kept building and opening more of them. First in small towns and rural areas, then in larger towns, then big cities, and it wasn't long before he had a national chain. By 1992, when Sam Walton died, there were more than 1,700 Walmart stores. It was the biggest retailer in the country. It employed more than 600,000 people, and Sam Walton was the richest man in America. In 2003, the stores numbered more than 3,200 in the U.S. and more than 1,100 in foreign countries. The company employed more than 1,300,000 people worldwide and served more than 1 million customers a week. Along the way, Woolworths and other older retailers such as Kresge's tried to get on the bandwagon with their Woolco and Kmart stores, but they couldn't seem to get it right. They had given up their old five and dime identity to become higher-priced general retailers. And when Walmart came along and redefined that part of the market, the others seemed to have run out of the kind of imagination they'd had in the beginning. Now, here's the twist to the story. David Gold was running a liquor store that he had inherited from his father. He noticed that whenever he put out a display of goods priced at 98 cents or $1, the goods would sell okay. But if his sign said 99 cents, the goods sold out in no time. He decided that he would open a store called the 99-cent only store, where everything would be priced at 99 cents. Sound familiar? Frank Woolworth's imaginative idea from 1879, which had been dropped at his namesake chain by the 1940s and 1950s, had just gotten a fresh shot of imagination from David Gold in 1982. As usual, friends and family told him he was crazy, but David Gold went out to find suppliers who would sell him discontinued merchandise or overproduced products at a price low enough that he could offer them to the public at 99 cents. He found them. And they even had brand-name products of everything from hardware to pantyhose, cleaning products, motor oil, kitchenware, cosmetics, electronics, toys, canned goods, frozen foods, cookies, fresh fruit, even gourmet foods. More than 5,000 items that he could sell for 99 cents and still make a profit. David Gold opened his first well-lighted, brightly colored green and fuchsia wide-aisle store in Inglewood, California in 1982. By 2003, he had 142 stores in California, Nevada, and Arizona. and he was listed on the Forbes 400 as having earned a personal fortune estimated at more than $650 million. As Napoleon Hill wrote elsewhere about the creation of Piggly Wiggly, where in this story do you see the slightest indication of something that you could not duplicate? The plan, which made millions of dollars for its originator, was a very simple idea that anyone could have adopted. Yet considerable imagination was required to put the idea to work in a practical sort of way. The more simple and easily adapted an idea is, the greater is its value, as no one is looking for ideas that are involved with great detail or are in any way complicated. This is the end of the editor's comments. There is no standard price on ideas. The creator of ideas sets his or her own price, and if they are smart, they get it. The story of practically every great fortune starts with a day when a creator of ideas and a seller of ideas got together and worked in harmony. Carnegie surrounded himself with men who could do what he could not do, men who created ideas and men who put ideas into operation, and that was what made him and the others fabulously rich. Millions of people go through life hoping for favorable breaks. Perhaps a favorable break can get you an opportunity, but the safest plan is not to depend upon luck. It was a favorable break that gave me the biggest opportunity of my life, but more than 20 years of determined effort had to be devoted to that opportunity before it became an asset. The break consisted of my good fortune in meeting and gaining the cooperation of Andrew Carnegie. On that occasion, Carnegie planted in my mind the idea of organizing the principles of achievement into a philosophy of success. Millions of people have profited by the discoveries made in the years of research, and fortunes have been accumulated through the application of the philosophy. The beginning was simple. It was an idea that anyone might have developed. The favorable break came through Carnegie. But what about the determination, definiteness of purpose, and the desire to attain the goal, and the persistent effort of all those years of research? It was no ordinary desire that survived disappointment, discouragement, temporary defeat, criticism, and the constant reminding that I was wasting my time. It was a burning desire, an obsession. When the idea was first planted in my mind by Mr. Carnegie, it was coaxed, nursed, and enticed to remain alive. Gradually, the idea became a giant under its own power, and it coaxed, nursed, and drove me. Ideas are like that. First, you give life and action and guidance to ideas. Then they take on a power of their own and sweep aside all opposition. Ideas are intangible forces, but they have more power than the physical brains that give birth to them. They have the power to live on after the brain that creates them has returned to dust. Tell the world what you intend to do, but first, show it. Chapter 8. Organized Planning. The crystallization of desire into action. The sixth step toward riches. You have learned that everything we create or acquire begins in the form of desire. Desire is taken on the first lap of its journey from the abstract to the concrete in the workshop of the imagination, where plans for its transition are created and organized. In Chapter 3, Desire, you were instructed to take 6 practical steps to begin translating your desire for money into its monetary equivalent. One of the steps you must take is the formation of a definite practical plan or plans through which this transformation may be made. Following are the basic instructions for making practical plans. Ally yourself with a group of as many people as you may need for the creation and carrying out of your plan or plans for the accumulation of money, making use of the mastermind principle. Compliance with this instruction is absolutely essential. Do not neglect it. Editor's comment. The Mastermind Alliance is built of 2 or more minds working actively together in perfect harmony toward a common goal. This concept was introduced in Chapter 6, Specialized Knowledge, and is described in more detail in Chapter 11, The Power of the Mastermind. This is the end of the editor's comment. Before forming your Mastermind Alliance, Decide what advantages and benefits you may offer the individual members of your group in return for their cooperation. No one will work indefinitely without some form of compensation. No intelligent person should request or expect another to work without adequate compensation, although this may not always be in the form of money. Arrange to meet with the members of your mastermind group at least twice a week, and more often if possible, until you have jointly perfected the necessary plan or plans for the accumulation of money. Maintain perfect harmony between yourself and every member of your mastermind group. If you fail to carry out this instruction to the letter, you may expect to meet with failure. The mastermind principle cannot work where perfect harmony does not prevail. Keep in mind these facts. You are engaged in an undertaking of major importance to you. To be sure of success, you must have plans that are faultless. You must have the advantage of the experience, education, native ability, and imagination of other minds. This is the way it has been done by every person who has accumulated a great fortune. No individual has sufficient experience, education, natural ability, and knowledge to ensure the accumulation of a great fortune without the cooperation of other people. Every plan you adopt for making money should be the joint creation of yourself and every other member of your mastermind group. You may originate your own plans, either in whole or in part, but see that those plans are checked and approved by the members of your mastermind alliance. If your first plan fails, try another. If the first plan that you adopt does not work successfully, replace it with a new plan. If this new plan fails to work, replace it with still another, and so on, until you find a plan that does work. Right here is the point at which the majority of people meet with failure, because of their lack of persistence in creating new plans to take the place of those that fail. The most intelligent person living cannot succeed in accumulating money, or in any other undertaking, without plans that are practical and workable. Just keep this fact in mind, and remember when your plans fail, that temporary defeat is not permanent failure. It may only mean that your plans have not been sound. Build other plans. Start all over again. Temporary defeat should mean only one thing: the certain knowledge that there is something wrong with your plan. Millions of people go through life in misery and poverty because they lack a sound plan through which to accumulate a fortune. Your achievement can only be as good as the plans you make. You are never whipped until you quit in your own mind. James J. Hill, who was the greatest railroad builder of them all, met with temporary defeat when he first tried to raise the capital needed to build the Great Northern Railroad from the east to the west. But he turned defeat into victory through new plans. Henry Ford met with temporary defeat, not only at the beginning of his automobile career, but even after he had gone a long way toward the top. But he, too, created new plans and went marching on to financial victory. We see people who have accumulated great fortunes, but we often recognize only their triumph, and we overlook the temporary defeats that they had to surmount before arriving. No follower of this philosophy can reasonably expect to accumulate a fortune without experiencing temporary defeat. When defeat comes, accept it as a signal that your plans are not sound. Rebuild those plans and set sail once more toward your goal. If you give up before your goal has been reached, you're a quitter. A quitter never wins, and a winner never quits. Write this sentence on a piece of paper, in letters an inch high, and place it where you will see it every night before you go to sleep and every morning before you go to work. When you begin to select members for your mastermind group, choose those who do not take defeat seriously. Some people foolishly believe that only money can make money. This is not true. Desire, transmuted into its monetary equivalent through the principles in this book, is the way money is made. Money, of itself, is nothing but inert matter. It cannot move, think, or talk, but it can hear when someone who desires it calls it to come. Intelligent planning is essential for success in any undertaking designed to accumulate riches. Following are detailed instructions to those who must begin the accumulation of riches by selling personal services. It should encourage you to know that practically all the great fortunes began either from selling personal services or from the sale of ideas. When you think about it, what else except ideas and personal services can you give in return for riches if you don't have products or property? Leaders and followers. Broadly speaking, there are two types of people in the world. One type is known as leaders and the other as followers. Decide at the outset whether you intend to become a leader in your chosen calling or remain a follower. The difference in compensation is vast. The follower cannot expect to make as much as a leader, although some followers make the mistake of thinking they should. It is no disgrace to be a follower. On the other hand, it is no credit to remain a follower. Most great leaders began as followers. They became great leaders because they were intelligent followers. With few exceptions, the person who cannot follow a leader intelligently cannot become an efficient leader. The person who can follow a leader most efficiently is usually the person who develops into leadership most rapidly. An intelligent follower has many advantages, including the opportunity to acquire knowledge from the leader. The major attributes of leadership. The following are important factors of leadership. 1. Unwavering courage based upon knowledge of yourself and your occupation. No follower wishes to be dominated by a leader who lacks self-confidence and courage. Certainly no intelligent follower will be dominated by such a leader for very long. 2. Self-control. The person who cannot control himself can never control others. Self-control sets a strong example for your followers, which the more intelligent followers will emulate. 3. A keen sense of justice. Without a sense of fairness and justice, no leader can command and retain the respect of their followers. 4. Definiteness of decision. Those who waver in decisions show that they are not sure of themselves and therefore cannot lead others successfully. 5. Definiteness of plans. Successful leaders must plan their work and work their plans. Leaders who move by guesswork, without practical definite plans, are like a ship without a rudder. Sooner or later, they will land on the rocks. 6. The habit of doing more than paid for. One of the penalties of leadership is the necessity of the leaders to willingly do more than they require of their followers. 7. A pleasing personality. Leadership calls for respect. Followers will not respect a leader who does not grade high on all of the factors of a pleasing personality. 8. Sympathy and understanding. Successful leaders must be in sympathy with their followers. Moreover, they must understand them and their problems. 9. Mastery of detail. Successful leadership calls for mastery of the details of the leader's position. 10. Willingness to assume full responsibility. Successful leaders must be willing to assume responsibility for the mistakes and the shortcomings of their followers. If a leader tries to shift this responsibility, that leader will not remain the leader. If one of your followers makes a mistake or is incompetent, you must consider that it is you who failed. 11. Cooperation. The successful leader must understand and apply the principle of cooperative effort and be able to induce followers to do the same. Leadership calls for power, and power calls for cooperation. There are two forms of leadership. The first, and by far the most effective, is leadership by consent of and with the sympathy of the followers. The second is leadership by force, without the consent and sympathy of the followers. History is filled with evidences that leadership by force cannot endure. The downfall and disappearance of dictators and kings is significant. It means that people will not follow forced leadership indefinitely. Napoleon, Mussolini, Hitler were examples of leadership by force. Their leadership passed. Editor's comment. The following may also be added to the list: Idi Amin, Francisco Franco, Saddam Hussein, Ferdinand Marcos, Slobodan Milosevic, Juan Perón, General Augusto Pinochet, Pol Pot, General Suharto, the Taliban leaders in Afghanistan, Marshal Josip Broz Tito, Joseph Stalin, and subsequent leaders of the Soviet Union, East Germany, and the other countries in the Communist bloc. This is the end of the editor's comment. Those that remain see their power eroding and slipping away. Leadership by consent of the followers is the only leadership that can endure. People may follow forced leadership temporarily, but they will not do so willingly. Successful leaders will embrace the 11 factors of leadership described in this chapter, as well as some other factors. Those who make these attributes the basis of their leadership will find abundant opportunity to lead in any walk of life. The 10 major causes of failure in leadership. The following are the major faults of leaders who fail. It is just as essential for you to know what not to do as it is to know what to do. 1. Inability to organize details. Efficient leadership calls for the ability to organize and master details. No genuine leader is ever too busy to do anything that may be required in the capacity as leader. Whether a leader or follower, when you admit that you are too busy to change your plans or to give attention to any emergency, you are admitting your inefficiency. The successful leader must be the master of all details connected with the position. That means, of course, that you must acquire the habit of relegating details to capable lieutenants. 2. Unwillingness to render humble service. Truly great leaders are willing, when occasion demands, to perform any sort of labor that they would ask another to perform. The greatest among ye shall be the servant of all is a truth that all able leaders observe and respect. 3.